All right. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to start right away. We don't want to waste Mark's time. So let's begin with our Dream Big series brought to you by the Harvard Association for Law and Business. I'm Eric Zilber, a 2L at Harvard Law and on the executive committee of HALB. This summer, I worked at BSC Global, specifically the Brooklyn Nets and Barclays Center. I also want to thank my girlfriend, Maeve, for listening to and editing my thoughts. Elizabeth?
And hi, everybody. My name is Elisabeth Lopez. I'm also a 2L at the Harvard Law School. This past summer, I was a summer associate at Du Bois in Plimpton, New York City.
And of course, Mark Cuban, who needs absolutely no introduction. Thank you, Mark, for giving us the most generous gift I could imagine, the gift of your time. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. I'm a Noel. I interned nowhere and no one would give me a job, so I found my way here.
If I could, I'd give you an honorary degree from here. So I don't know if I have that power though. So if there's, let's begin. If there's only one thing I'd like for you to take away from this talk, let it be this. Please, 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 if you have not already voted, please vote. And if you have, please encourage those around you to do the same. In response, some might say, why should I vote? I live in X-leaning state, and so there's really no point. However, being an American requires doing the right thing, even if it may make no perceived difference. And realistically, the sum of our individual actions will always make a huge difference. So please, exercise a right that many citizens of this country do not have. Vote on America's future. Some further thoughts, since after Mark starts talking, you will likely not want to hear much from me. The point of this Dream Big speaker series is to inspire those of us privileged enough to usually be attending Harvard Law in person, or now anyone lucky enough to be joining us via Zoom, to dream big. So let's be candid. I think all of us would agree that there are many more people who say, I'm dreaming big, than those who actually do it. I mean, can you really be dreaming big if you know 10 others doing exactly the same thing that you are? Possibly, if you're curing cancer or COVID or working to free unfairly convicted prisoners. But if not, have you examined the path others have not chosen? And if that scares you, why does it? If you think about it, all big dreamers, Mark included, at one point or another followed a path less traveled. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, let's remember that true big dreamers don't focus exclusively on their own dreams. They help others achieve theirs. Finally, we have to acknowledge COVID-19. In the United States alone, there have been 9 million plus confirmed cases and more than 230,000 Americans have perished. I offer my sincerest condolences to anyone who has lost someone to COVID or contracted it themselves. I also hope that we as a nation will learn from our mistakes in handling the pandemic, so those who died will not have died in vain. As Captain Sullenberger, hero pilot of the Miracle on the Hudson, wisely pointed out in 2009, we have purchased at great cost lessons literally bought with blood. We cannot have the moral failure of forgetting these lessons and having to relearn them again.
Thank you for those remarks, Eric. So for everybody listening, I'm going to give you an overlay of the format of this talk. So Eric will get us started by interviewing Mark for about 30 minutes. Afterwards, I'll be asking some questions from the audience that have been sent in by you. So don't worry if you haven't already submitted a question, you can still submit one using the Q&A function via Zoom. We will be on the lookout for those throughout the webinar. So without further ado, let's kick things off, Eric.
So I know I said Mark doesn't need an introduction, but come on, before we begin, let's be real. Let's frame the conversation. Here are some of his accomplishments. He's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, the 2011 NBA champs. He's a billionaire, a best-selling author, in my opinion, the best shark on Shark Tank, and of course, a wonderful husband and father. Thank you, Mark, for being with us. And before we begin, make sure to tune into Shark Tank on Friday nights, and specifically season 12. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
So let's jump in right away. First question. How important do you think tomorrow's election is relative to prior elections? In what ways is it different, and how could that affect business?
So before we get there, Eric, let me go back to something you said in your introduction about voting, about some people thinking, there may not be a need to vote, their vote may not count, whatever the reason may be. I think something particularly new voters don't consider is that whether or not you voted is a public record. That you don't know what I voted, who I voted for, but you do know whether or not I voted. Why is that important when you're considering voting? Well, that becomes part of your brand, because going forward, I can assure you that if you're looking to do something that impacts government, or you're taking a stand politically, someone's going to check to see if you voted. Because if you have not voted, your impact could potentially be diminished, because that is now part of your brand. So don't think only in terms of the consequence of your vote, but think in terms of the consequence on how you'll be perceived on the things you're trying to do going forward. So that's number one. In terms of the importance, every presidential election, every election is important in its own way. I think this election is less about Donald Trump and Joe Biden, even though I'm a Biden supporter and I've been very clear about that. And I encourage anybody to vote for Joe Biden for a number of reasons. But this election is pushing us to question, how did we get here? And what do we need to change in order not to be here again, where we've got such a partisan country and we've got such acrimony and animosity about and between two different candidates. And to me, as a business person, it made me go and say, okay, if I was starting from scratch and looking at the business of politics, what would we do differently? And I think one of the first things we have to do is dig down deeper and say, okay, why is it, how do we get to these two candidates? Are these the best that this country has to offer? I think the majority of people, even whether or not you're a Trump or Biden supporter, would say no. And the question becomes, why? What is it that we're doing? And when I've looked at those things, it gets me to the point of maybe a lot of that acrimony and that partisanship is a function of how we vote. There's a great book that I read called The Politics Industry. And it talks a lot about ranked choice voting and the impact of primaries on the incentives for politicians. And you would think the obvious answer to what business are politicians in is to say they're serving their constituents. The reality is that's not the case. I mean, just the very fact that Eric brought up the question of, does my vote count, right? And should I vote, is so telling and meaningful, because that should never be a question. And so that could lead to top 2 or top 3 voting. That could lead to ranked choice voting. But I encourage everybody to really start digging in to new types of options, particularly if you live, well, you are in Massachusetts, many of you, it's on the ballot tomorrow for RCV2, I think it is. So please vote pro ranked choice voting, because in ranked choice voting, every vote does count and does have an impact. And just as importantly, I talked to a lot of folks about running for president, and one of the things that came up continuously, oh, you'd be a spoiler. Republicans thought I'd be a spoiler on one side, Democrats thought I'd be a spoiler on the other side. Alternative forms of voting, such as ranked choice voting, eliminate that. There's no such thing as a spoiler any longer. And so if we're, when we talk about the importance of this election, beyond who wins, we have to start asking the question, how do we disrupt our voting process so that rather than candidates just trying to get through the primaries and their customers being the most extreme and partisan primary voters and donors, we need to find better alternatives. So I encourage everybody to look for ways to disrupt, because I really think if and when that happens, that could be the most important thing that any individual can do, disrupting how we vote after paying your taxes and being in the military in no particular order.
Absolutely. And absolutely right on point about what's on the poll for Massachusetts. So that's another reason why everyone should vote. And actually, I should say that we have a large group, not even from Harvard Law here, over 80% are outside of the area. So all over the country, please make sure to make those choices. Second question, if you will, Mark. Neither of your parents graduated college. So statistically speaking, it wasn't super likely when you were born that you would become a billionaire. Looking back, which events or choices that you made do you think set you on your path?
Well, there's two questions there. One, did I think I could be wealthy at some point? And two, becoming a billionaire. I'll work backwards. Becoming a billionaire takes luck. Period. End of story. You know, I happened to be a tech guy that was entrepreneurial and started a company that started the streaming industry right when the internet stock market was just starting to take off. That's what led to me being a billionaire. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Before that, you know, growing up, you know, my dad did upholstery on cars. My mom did odd jobs. My mom was like 20 when I was born. So they were just kind of figuring out as I grew up. But they were always supportive, saying, look, you're going to go to college somehow, and you're going to figure this out. And you're probably going to have to figure out all these things for yourself because we're not really experienced in business. And I remember, you know, as I started creating these little businesses as a kid, my dad would just roll his eyes and, you know, say he had no idea what I was doing. And my mom was concerned, and she made me get a job being an apprentice, learning how to lay carpet because I needed to learn a trade just in case all this business stuff didn't work out. But I just always took responsibility to figure things out, I think. And the underpinning of that is just, I read like a sponge. Everything I could get my hands on about any business person, magazine, book, whatever, anything I could watch, I did. And I was relentless in that as a kid. And because I didn't know what I didn't know, whether it was selling baseball cards, selling garbage bags door to door, selling trading stamps, you know, I went from being a stamp collector, like I took my mom's stamp collection when I was 15, I think, maybe, yeah, about 15. And just because I thought it was interesting, you know, all the different countries she had collected as a kid. And then I found out that people bought and sold stamps, you know, as a business. And so I went to these stamp shows, and I literally would look at a stamp. I remember vividly going to one stamp dealer at a stamp show, seeing this one old Abraham Lincoln stamp and saying, well, no, you thinking to myself, he misgraded the quality of the stamp, and then buying it for 25 cents and taking it to another dealer and saying, see, this is the higher grade version of this, you know, potentially valuable stamp, and selling it for $50 when I was 16. And that got me to understand very early that not all markets were efficient, and that by putting in the effort and gaining knowledge, I could take advantage of those inefficiencies and do things that other people hadn't, you know, considered doing. And that kind of propelled me throughout my career.
And I love those stories. I was going to say that also probably built up your sales experience, right? I mean, how else can you get those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, you learn, you know, and as a kid, no one would ever say no to me. You know, like when I'm selling garbage bags door to door. Hi, my name is Mark. Do you use garbage bags? Would it be easier if I dropped off a box of 100 garbage bags for $6? It cost me $3 every week.
Great margin.
Yeah, and just take that hassle off away from you. Sure, Mark. I mean, who's going to say no to this version as a 12-year-old? And so, yeah, I learned to sell. I also sold magazines door to door because I thought I got to the point when I was 16, I thought I was a good salesperson, and I learned how to deal with every objective. Excuse me, ma'am. When you tell, and this is back in the day, right? But I still remember the script. When you tell your family that you've just spent $1 on the education and entertainment of your family, do you think they are going to really appreciate it and be excited about it? Oh, and I had a response to every answer that I got. And so, you know, those are the types of things that built my confidence and made me realize that selling wasn't convincing, selling was helping. And that really paid dividends.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a totally different way of looking at business. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. You actually brought up a point that was going to be my next question. So why don't we jump to it? You sold broadcast.com to Yahoo for $5.7 billion. And I mean that literally. I think you received stock, but if so, you know, were you worried about, you know, a tech bubble? How did you hedge? And feel free to go into, you know, kind of a lot of detail. There's a lot of finance nerds. So okay. I'm sure they'd love to hear how you did that. Yeah.
So yeah, when we sold it for $5.7 billion in Yahoo stock, this is before the internet bubble had burst. And I had traded stocks, you know, so quick background. After I got a job out of college, a couple jobs in actually, for computer software company, got fired about 9 months in, started my own company called MicroSolutions, which did systems integrations. We grew that. I grew that from starting out of starting living 6 guys in a 3-bedroom apartment, and just starting it with nothing, and then growing it to about 30-some million in sales. And I sold it. I took that money and eventually I started trading stocks and did really, really well. I was making 80-90% a year, and turned that into a hedge fund that I only owned for like 9 months because somebody bought it immediately. And that gave me funding to start AudioNet, which turned into the streaming industry. And I bring those things up because, in particular, with the trading stocks in there, I found out very quickly that analysts at a lot of these companies didn't understand the technology to the depth that I did. So I was able to trade these things, and kill it, literally kill it. And so fast forward to having sold broadcast.com, I had seen companies be the hot darlings and just accelerate, and the stock prices go nuts, and then bam, they were gone. Or, just that PC business had a computer boom, stock market boom for PC business. There was a stock market boom for software companies. There was a stock market boom for local area networking companies throughout the late 80s and early 90s. And I had seen those things and watched them come and go. And so I was like, when we sold broadcast, I'm like, you don't need to tell me twice. I want to keep that B next to my name. And so the first thing I did, with the law at the time said, if I was going to hedge for 6 months, and I had no restraints from Yahoo, I wasn't on the board, I wasn't considered an insider, none of those things, and that was intentional on my part. So I was able to go out and hedge with any index that didn't have Yahoo as more than 5% of the fund, right? And so I took every penny I had, 20-some million dollars, and I bought a put on that fund, so that in that 6-month window, if the market cratered, I would hopefully make money and come out ahead, depending on how much it cratered. I lost all that money. I mean, I got a little bit back because it didn't go completely to zero, but and then immediately, the minute that thing ended, I put on a collar that was called one of the top 10 trades on Wall Street of all time, because it hit right before the bubble burst. And I sold a sequence of calls that went out over the next 3 years and bought puts. And I actually went a little heavier on the puts just because of the volatility. There was a little bit more, there was more on the call side that I could sell because the market was trending up. And so I went and bought a little bit heavy on the puts. And then when everything cratered, I protected everything. And that also led to the creation of the VIX, believe it or not, because at the time I was working with Goldman Sachs, and there was no way to determine volatility and no way to trade volatility, not the trading related to the VIX. And so I was like, look, how can we not trade the VIX? You guys got to create something for me. And even though they didn't stay at Goldman, there was a couple of guys that spun out and created funds that tried, and you see all these ETFs that try to mimic and trade the VIX. And so that was part and parcel, that came as a result of that big hedge.
Thank you. Yeah, super informative. I mean, I feel like it's so hard to know, somebody sells something for $5 billion. How does that actually work? Thank you. So next question. Many of our audience members are currently in some sort of school. What would you be spending your time on if you were in school right now? And also, some of your peers dropped out of college, but you didn't. So when do you think dropping out makes sense?
I never think dropping out makes sense. Now, you don't have to go full time, but we'll start there. To me, I always wanted to be able to control my own destiny. And that included understanding finance, understanding accounting, understanding marketing, understanding sales, all the things that even, the basics of business law, all the things that every entrepreneur is going to need at some level. I didn't want to have to say, well, I don't know anything about finance. Let me go find a finance guy, or, help me with my business plan because I can't do this, this, or this. Excuse me. So to me, having that base is important, but also college also gives you that thirst for knowledge, right? It teaches you, it helps you learn how to learn. And that is a constant in business. You always have to to learn how to learn. And so that's always important. And what was your first question again? I just spaced it.
First question was, what would you be focusing on in school if you were there?
So right now, going forward, everything's going to be driven by AI. I don't care if you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to have to look how, how data is accumulated and fed into AI, and its derivatives. You're going to have to understand AI, just like, in the mid 90s, people had to figure out what the internet was. In the mid 2000s, you had to figure out what wireless was, and you didn't have, but I think with AI, even more so than wireless and networking and the internet, you are going to have to be more than just literate. You're going to have to understand how models are built and what the pluses and minuses are. There's a book, Competing in the Age of AI, that's interesting. There's another book called The Master Algorithm that's also relevant, because AI is going to impact every industry more than the internet impacted industry. It's just that dramatic and having that big an impact. And so, even as a lawyer, you're going to have to understand what can you automate, what can you not automate? What are the limitations of using AI within your business? What about domain knowledge? Because I can see a bunch of lawyers from everyday law schools being hired just to scrub data or label data or insert data into models. And because domain knowledge is critical, and how do you review that? So there's so many nuanced elements to artificial intelligence that I think, it's something that everybody needs to know. And actually, I just started something called the AI Boot Camp for my foundation, where we are training kids for 4 weeks, 4 Saturdays, high school kids, on the basics of AI and how to start developing models and how it can be used. And when I say AI, that incorporates computer vision, GANs, all the different manifestations of AI. And so you've got to learn it. It's got to be something. You can't, 25 years ago, people would say, well, 40 years ago, people would say, I don't need to learn computers, and we would call them dinosaurs. And then 30 years ago, it was like, I don't need to learn the internet. And guess what? You call somebody who doesn't understand that technology, either really old or really broke. And the same thing is going to apply to AI.
And to be clear, does that mean that people should, become an engineer or a computer scientist, or kind of like you could just read a few books and learn the general sphere?
But look, I didn't take AI in school, but I took Coursera classes. I took machine learning tutorials on AWS. I watched all the YouTube videos. I got to the point where I could do a basic neural network in JavaScript. It takes time. It takes energy, right? But having that understanding now, because every deal, every business investment you're looking at is going to discuss AI at some level, and 99% of them are bullshit, right? Oh, we're using AI for this, and this. No. And I'll tell you the other element of it. Right now,
it's the same thing as .com, right? Back in 2000.
It's worse.
Sorry to cut you off.
It's worse because in .com, everybody could basically understand it. With AI, so if someone just creates, a crazy, .com thing, you can look at the business and understand what they were trying to do. When someone says, I just hired the best AI technologist from Harvard, and this person's going to do this, and this, even though it has no relevance to what they're trying to do, 99% of people aren't going to understand that that's a problem unless you've done the work. And so as an investor and as somebody who's trying to grow businesses, that's important to me. But the other thing I was going to say, if you look what's happening now, this country, from a business perspective, is a country of AI haves and AI have-nots. And if you look at the companies with the accelerating market caps in the stock market, the Apples, the Netflix, the Amazon, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Facebooks, the one commonality they all have is that they're the best in the world at artificial intelligence. And it's no accident that that's what's propelling them. When you look at the antitrust actions that the government brought against Google, all the government was basically saying was, you guys are better at artificial intelligence than all your competitors, and we're going to try to hold you responsible for being that way. Now, to me, that's wrong. And what's even worse, AI is the foundation for how we're going to compete globally. If we're going to compete in manufacturing with China, who's investing everything they possibly can in AI and AI for manufacturing and robotics, if we don't have great technologists that understand AI, we're not going to be able to compete. And in whatever business you go into, if you're competing against somebody that truly understands and can implement AI cost effectively, you're going to lose. Period, end of story. So if you don't understand it, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
100%. Thank you so much for sharing that. Going on to a different topic, politics and sports.
Okay.
What do you think the appropriate mix is, if any, and why?
It's up to the individual. You know, politics and sports have always been intertwined. You know, Jesse Owens, Muhammad Ali, it cracked me up. Ted Cruz, you know, and I go back and forth on Twitter. And
I saw you had some good back and forth responses.
yeah, I don't know if he had a decent response, but I had fun. But, you know, and he was going on and on about sports and politics should not be intertwined. And then he posts a video with Muhammad Ali in it. I mean, and, you know, Muhammad Ali is the definition of sports and politics. You know, they kept him from fighting when he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali and adopted the Muslim religion, or Islam. You know, they wouldn't let him fight. And he said, I'm not going to go over and fight the Vietnamese because they've never done anything to me. He was the definition of politics. And here's Ted Cruz putting him out there, you know, as a model. And so when anybody has a platform, and in this world today with social media, everybody has a platform. You're not going to tamp down individualism. It's always going to be connected at some level, as it should be. You don't give up your rights to citizenship. So that's part one. Part two is it, you know, relates to the NBA, you know, and our support for the Black Lives Matter movement, not, you know, the founders of the hashtag, not the website, but the movement. That's about trying to end or at least impact racism. There's nothing political about trying to end racism. That's an American ideal. And so the challenge, the underlying challenge there is in this day and age, and with all the social media driving media, controlling narrative, defining and controlling narrative has greater impact than the underlying truisms, right, of sports and media, you know, or sports and politics. You know, one of the challenges that Black Lives Matters, the movement, has faced is because it's a distributed movement. It doesn't have, you know, 2, 3, 4 people that are the definitive leadership. There's nobody that can present the narrative for the company and to speak for them. Yet, you know, when there's people who are trying to diminish the impact of Black Lives Matters, they've been the ones setting the narrative, particularly on conservative-leaning social media and media platforms. And that's been a real challenge for them. And so, you know, NBA players have a strong voice. And when they speak up and try to support the movement and try to end, you know, racism and systemic racism and look towards police reform and suggest ideas, that's a good thing. That's an American ideal. I mean, we said, you know, for liberty and justice for all as part of the Pledge of Allegiance for a reason. And so I don't ever see that as a problem. I see it as an opportunity.
100%, absolutely. So a little bit different again. What is your biggest personal and professional mistake, and what did you learn from each?
I mean, I continue to make a lot of them. You know, you evolve. You know, as an entrepreneur, I've evolved and learned a lot. You know, at the beginning, it was just go, go, go. I don't want to be broke. I hate being broke. And, you know, I wasn't as nice as I should have been, right? I was a take no prisoners type, and I didn't mind yelling and screaming. That was a mistake. You know, I wasn't as inclusive as I should have been, like with the Mavericks and others. I didn't pay it, you know, there's investments that I've had where, okay, I didn't pay attention to the details. You know, I got to the point in my life where I did things because I wanted to have fun. And when I did that and disconnected myself from the nuts and bolts of the organization, that created challenges for me. So there's a variety of things, but, you know, like I said earlier, life, business, things are always changing, and you've got to always learn, always be learning. And so I do, you know, at this point in my life, I'm just getting started. I have a lot more yet to accomplish. And so, you know, I'll take those things that I've learned and get smarter.
Perfect. In that case, what still motivates you then, Mark? Do you ever want to retire? What's the long-term plan?
The long-term plan is to keep on kicking ass. I'm competitive as fuck, right? That's what it comes down to. I mean, you know, I wrote this little book that's about 70 pages, and really I try to keep it as short and sweet as possible.
Best-selling book.
Best-selling book, right? How to win at the sport of business, because business is a sport. You know, I talk to our athletes all the time at the Mavs, and they're like, oh, I'm so competitive. I'm like, dude, you compete 48 minutes, you practice, you have an off season, right? You know who the opponent is. In business, there's some Harvard law graduate who thinks, you know, he or she is the smartest thing going, and they're trying to kick my ass.
Whoa, Mark, I never said that.
I'm not saying you're right, but there's always somebody trying. It could be some 12-year-old girl or boy, you know, coming out of nowhere, because the game is always changing. You know, my dad used to always say, you don't live in the world you were born into. And he's 100% right. You know, everything is always going to change. And so for me, that's exciting. There's always going to be something new, something, you know, to be created, something to be disruptive. And I love to compete, and I love to fuck things up.
And that's how you learn the most, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, maybe now going a little earlier in your life, when you were growing up, who did you want to be, or what? And who were your mentors, either as a child or maybe later on in life?
I wanted to be a basketball player. I didn't care which one. Or maybe a baseball player. And I really didn't have any mentors. I mean, I had a lot of people who helped at various levels. Here's something, or I'll help you here. But nobody that I really turned to. And again, that was more a function of my parents, who were always, you got to figure this out for yourself. And that's really been my approach to this very day. If, you know, like we're talking about artificial intelligence, it wasn't like I went out and talked to the 5 leading proponents, you know, or developers. It was like, okay, Mark, you've got to figure this out and learn it, because when you sit in a meeting, people are going to, you know, you're going to have to stand on your own. The minute you have to defer, you can't control your own destiny. So I've never been big on mentors or, you know, anything of that sort.
Got it. Okay. Maybe we can transition to giving back. And what does that mean to you? I know that you're you're active in the Fallen Patriot Fund. You've helped former NBA players who have fallen on hard times. Why did you feel particularly passionate about these causes, or just giving back in general, maybe?
Yeah, it's not so much that I have one cause that I'm really excited about or anything like that. I just try to, you know, when I find people who can't help themselves, or in particular that are in really dire circumstances, that's when I really try to help. You know, this might sound counterintuitive, but I think there's too many charities, right? And one of the great things that someone could do is consolidate charities. Because when there's a tragedy, someone, you know, it becomes very personal to people, and they go out and create a charity, and that's a good thing in some respect, but there's often duplication, which leads to administrative duplication, which means that it's not necessarily as efficient in providing what needs to be provided. So what I've always tried to do is be a bill payer, you know, meaning if someone needs a heart transplant and they don't have insurance, I'll pay for your heart transplant. If you have cancer and your insurance isn't paying for it, I'll pay for it. Because that's a direct impact, because nothing turns my stomach more and drives me crazier than giving to an organization and watching it filter down to go pay for this next, you know, big bash so we can raise more money, you know, and that's just not something I like to do. So to answer your question, I think it's important to give back. I think it's important to have a social mission, and every company needs a social construct, because, you know, unless you lift people up, nothing is successful. You know, and in this country, particularly now, we're only as strong as our weakest citizens. And so, you know, I look for ways that I can help, but I really, you know, I try to stay out of the circle of, you know, supporting causes that need to keep on raising money to help people. I'd rather try to either pay bills directly or find ways to make people or scenarios self-sufficient.
That makes sense. Direct impact. Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe what advice do you give your kids? You know, what are the core values that you hope to instill in them?
So some of my sayings that drive them crazy is, the one thing in life you can control is your effort. That's pretty self-evident. How you do anything is how you do everything. This is something I wish I had learned when I was a kid, because I was sloppy. I mean, just look behind me at my office. You know, I
I
always
see your trophy. I see your trophy.
But, you know, I always, I've had to partner with someone who's very anal and details oriented, because I'm certainly not. And only since I've had kids really, where I've had to set an example where it's been, okay, how you do anything is how you do everything. And the habits you get into in life are, you know, how you'll execute on any projects or any goals that you have. And so those are the two primary things. And then obviously the third is you got to love to learn. Now things are different. You know, I talked a lot about reading when I was a kid, but like with my son, you know, who's 11 now, I remember, because it upset me when he and my middle daughter, who's 14 now, weren't big readers. My oldest daughter is. And I was like, oh my God, this is awful, awful, awful. And I remember one time, my son, he was 9 at the time, Jake, he goes, Dad, how come you don't do royalty deals on Shark Tank Friday nights on ABC? And I'm like, you know what royalties are? And he's like, yeah, that's when you take a percentage of sales. And I'm like, well, it's because of gross margin. You don't want to eat up the gross margin paying somebody else a royalty. I'm like, do you know what gross margins are? He goes, yeah, that's the difference between your selling price and your cost of goods sold. And I'm like, where did you learn all this? He goes, on YouTube. And here I've been trying to get him to read this book, that book, this book, you know, how to start a business as a kid, when any way I can get him connected to whatever it is, you know, computers, technology, whatever. And, you know, he consumes everything via, you know, video now. And so, you know, with my kids, I've had to adapt and recognize that people don't learn them the same way today, particularly Gen Z and, you know, whatever they're calling his generation as now an 11-year-old, as they used to. And so I've tried to be adaptive. I mean, my kids literally get more of their news from TikTok now, you know, and not just be in my $1,000 pants, you know.
I love the dances.
Yeah, the dances are fun. I like doing them too. You know, renegade. But in any event, yeah, you just have to adapt. And that's the point, that raising kids today is as much about, for a parent, as adapting to what's changing and being able to understand how to get things done. And obviously with COVID, that's all different too. We're obviously very fortunate, and, you know, I try to reinforce that to them every day, along with the fact that they have to be very careful. You know, it's hopefully, you know, not going to go, hopefully the vaccines will all work as promised. And personally, I think they will. But we have to deal with all these things. And so being a parent is different, and being a kid is far different, and being a student is far different.
Absolutely. This is my last substantive question before we go to the audience. Some say the most important decision in life is who you choose to have as your life partner. Could you tell us how you knew Tiffany was the one?
She put up with my shit, and she's independent. I used to have this thing when I was single: if you can't stand on your own, you can't stand together. And she definitely was independent, and she's smart, she's beautiful. You know, fortunately, my first wife was my trophy wife. And I guess maybe the other way around as well, I hope.
Yeah, let's hope, right? I would agree. Okay, last things. So before, you had previously said that small businesses could reach out to you, and I just want to give one more shout out to you. You did this in April. I was wondering if somebody wants to still get in touch with you, you know, if they're struggling during COVID, et cetera, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Link,
mcuban at Gmail. And so I'll read that first paragraph. And if you catch my attention with that first paragraph, then I'll be interested. And I'll tell you one other thing that I tell everybody that's looking at me for support or investment. The longer the backstory, the less likelihood that I'm going to read the whole backstory. So keep it to the point. I just can't, you know, it's unfortunate, but the reality is I get so many emails from people I don't know on a daily basis that you have to be succinct and right to the point.
For sure. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your email. Last thing, it's kind of, should be a very quick question. So currently the Harvard Law Sports Clinic places students with various teams through which I am working at the Nets, but we do not yet have a relationship with the Mavs. Would you consider taking any interns for credit from Harvard Law during an upcoming semester?
No.
Why is that?
You guys don't need help, right? Right now, we're really trying to expand into places that don't have access to professional sports teams. And enabling them to get access to those jobs. I think you guys are going to be okay. You guys kind of, the plate is set for you guys, not 100%. And I realize there's going to be a lot of challenges and struggles for each and every student and graduate in their own way. But sometimes, it's a little bit more difficult for others. And it's just, and part two to that is, part of what I've tried to accomplish over the last 2.5 years in particular is the more people we take from the communities we sell to and serve, the better we understand them and the better we're able to do business, right? And so, I don't need people that look like me. I need people that have come from communities that, I don't fully understand, that I can't easily connect to. And we need more people like that in our organization. I need, in Dallas, we're the 6th largest Indian community. So we try to bring on people from the Indian community, from, people of color, women, etc. That not just because they're people of color, not just because they're women, not just because they're of Indian descent, but because they come from communities that are underrepresented in our employee base, because we want to be better able to sell to them. So it's good business to expand the type of people that we hire.
Absolutely. No, definitely respect that. I'll say also there are a lot of Texans who are very diverse from Harvard Law. So but I definitely understand. Your answer. We're going to go to Elisabeth now to take some, and thank you so much for answering all that. We're going to go to Elisabeth now to take some previously submitted and audience questions.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for those great questions. And we gained a lot of insight from Mark on those. But now we're going to keep the party rolling here with some audience questions. So let's just start it off, Mark. Throughout your career, you have surely faced many personal, professional, and business opportunities. How do you know whether an opportunity is truly worth pursuing? And similarly, how do you lead a life where you make sure that you don't miss an opportunity when it arises?
Well, first, you're always going to miss opportunities, and you're always going to make mistakes. You can't have FOMO. You'll drive yourself crazy. And in terms of how do I know, it goes back to what I said earlier. I'm just always learning. And, where I've really done well is trying to stay one step ahead of everybody. So, my very first company after I got fired, MicroSolutions, we were one of the first 3 local area network systems integrators in the country. So we focused on LANs when people didn't even think about connecting PCs. When we started AudioNet, it was the first streaming company and the first streaming aggregator. When people said, you know what, I don't even know what the internet is, but I'll just turn on my TV or my radio, and when I said, well, no, you don't understand. At some point in time, everybody, bits are bits, and once everything goes digital, everything will be distributed digitally over the internet or something comparable. And they just laughed at me, right? And then in 2001, when we started the first all high definition TV network, HDNet, and everybody's like, no one's going to buy a high definition television. Those things are $25,000. I'm like, no, you don't understand. They're going to follow the price performance curve. In 2006, when we were the first to do day and date, and we started releasing everything. And by the way, I got nominated for 7 Academy Awards for Enron, the Smartest Guys in the Room, and Good Night and Good Luck. I didn't win any of them, but there's that little humble brag. But, I tried to stay ahead by saying, okay, people aren't doing this yet, but it makes perfect sense to do it. And when I'm looking for opportunities, that's what I look for. Okay, what are you doing that, someone's going to look back at and say, why didn't I think of that? Or what is it that you're doing that makes me say, why didn't I think of that? On Shark Tank, that, if someone walks on and pitches me and I'm like, dang, that's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Those are the types of opportunities I'm always looking for.
For sure. And since you mentioned Shark Tank, now we have to go there. So Shark Tank is in its 12th season.
Yeah.
What do you attribute to the longevity of Shark Tank?
I think the reason I do the show, and I know the other sharks as well, is it sends the message the American dream is alive and well. There's so much distrust of government, and for some millennials, or for a lot of millennials and the generations before them, they haven't seen improved economics, right? It's been difficult for them to succeed, more difficult than it was for their parents in a lot of cases. But we're that little oasis where people come on and show that You can have an idea from and live in a small house next to a cornfield in the Midwest and still get on Shark Tank and come up with an idea that turns you into a millionaire. We send the message that the American dream is alive and well. So that's part one. And part two, we teach kids that business can be interesting and fun. We're the #1 show. We were last time we checked last year, the #1 show watched by families together. That's important. So, tune in with your kids Friday nights on ABC, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Like I said, I'm always selling because, I really think we teach a lot of kids. And plus, we're in over 2,000 schools. And so those are the reasons we all do the show.
Yeah, so everybody on the webinar, you heard it here. You have to go watch Shark Tank. I grew up watching that show, still do, so love it. But we have another interesting question about Shark Tank here. Which moments have been edited out of Shark Tank that you wish would have been broadcasted or shared?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that before, so thank you. There are a lot of them, because the pitches can go on for 90 minutes. We've had some go on for more than 2 hours, and then they get edited down to 10 to 14 minutes. And so there are a lot of moments, and there's times when we get somebody who's really arrogant, which always just pisses me off to no end, right? It's like, why are you here? And in those particular cases, I'll start cussing at people, right? You can already tell I don't mind cussing at all, but I'm like, what the F are you? And they don't expect that because they don't see that on TV. And just the looks on their faces. And every now and then they'll put in a cuss word on, what airs, and they'll beep it out. But that happens a lot more than you think, because there are people who come on not truly looking for a deal or help. They just want the commercial. And so in those moments, it's fun. And then the other type, for those of you who watch the show a lot, if someone comes on with a supplement making a claim, I'm usually going to ask for data and ask them to prove it out. And there are just times when people melt, and they won't make them look too bad, right? They'll try to protect them a little bit. And so those are the moments I wish we could show, but that's a great question.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting answer to see what happens behind the scenes on Shark Tank. But now we're going to shift the conversation a little. I think we have two really interesting COVID-related questions here. So first off, in your opinion, what economic policies are going to help us recover from a COVID-related recession?
So first and foremost, we're lacking leadership, right? We're trying to figure out who to trust with our lives. And because we're not getting honesty, because we're not getting authentic feedback, because there's no transparency, there's no data, we have all this uncertainty associated with that. And so hopefully, and I've already voted for Joe Biden and said I'm supporting him, so that's not a surprise, but hopefully if he gets elected, he'll stand up there and say, okay, now I'm going to show you the data and we're going to be transparent and here's what's going on. So that's the first step. The second step is going to be the vaccine, because you're going to have to be honest with us about what's going on. And I actually know somebody who went to college with somebody else that are working on the vaccine, and I've already told them I'll volunteer to do it publicly to build people's confidence when it's ready, and hopefully that's shortly. And third, we need to have the science supporting the mask, which is already out there, and then encouraging people to wear masks. And if we can't get them to do it voluntarily, then I would not be opposed, not to a mandate, because I don't want to tell people you have to wear a mask. But I think you can say, particularly at the state level, but also on the national level, that every business has to require everyone who comes into that business to wear a mask. So if you want to run around outside in park or whatever, I don't think you can mandate, because I think smart people are going to do it anyways, and people who are not considerate, or trying to prove a point aren't going to do it. But you do have the wherewithal to mandate it for businesses. And if you're able to control that level of it, I think we're in a far better position to open up. I just don't think, as much as it makes common sense at some level to mandate masks, I think when you mandate things in this country, you get a group of people, 36%, I think I read somewhere, people who are just going to say, I'm not going to do it. Just like there were people who rebelled against seatbelts way back when those were first implemented or mandated. So I think where we are right now, because you always have to deal with context. You can't just pretend you're in a vacuum. Given the context and the circumstances, I think mandating it, businesses to require them, is going to work better than mandating everybody to wear them.
For sure, some interesting ideas here. But narrowing the scope a little, let's focus on sports.
Okay.
What should other sports leagues learn from the NBA in the bubble? Do you think there's a way to control and minimize COVID cases, for example, in the NFL, where a bubble-like facility most likely isn't possible?
Right. Yeah, like anything else, right? If people are responsible and follow the rules that are set, and you have a limit in where you can travel and who you can interact with, then you can make it work. I mean, when we shot season 12 of Shark Tank, we were in the bubble at the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas, and they were very strict. I didn't see sunlight for the 19 days that we shot. I mean, I woke up in the morning, put on my mask when I left, walked down to wardrobe, put on my suit, went to makeup, who had a hazmat suit on when they put my makeup on, went to the set, shot all day, went on the return path and did it again the next day. It was very specific, but we all knew what was at stake. If we were able to pull this off, not only were we able to make the show happen, but all those hundreds of people that worked on the show would have jobs because production is basically shut down in Hollywood. And we could have a template for future productions to work, which would create new jobs. And I think the same thing applies for sports. Even though you can't have a bubble per se, you can have very strict delineated rules on behavior that still allow you to interact with your family, still allow you to do certain things, but limits the scope of your interactions. And I think that would work along with tracking, tracing, and testing. Because if you're going to be a professional athlete, you have that responsibility to your teammates, the fans, all the people that work in that ecosystem. And so you need to be willing to be tracked and traced, because if there is a case like we saw in some other sports, you need to be able to track it down and find out why and make the changes that are necessary. And I think baseball and football did a good job of learning from their mistakes and just narrowing the scopes of interaction. But again, and that's the other thing, going back to the last question, I think, with the level of unemployment that we're at now, the level of uncertainty with the economy, I'm all for a transitional federal jobs guarantee, or at least a transitional federal jobs program where we hire, however, now it's probably 1 million people that we probably need to do tracking and tracing, and we invest in testing and for places that don't have it. And we standardize all of that, because we don't have standardized tests. We don't have a way to do standardized tracking and tracing. And by leaving it to the states, you have all these silos of information that just eliminate the effectiveness of them.
Amazing ideas here. It all seems so simple. So let's follow the rules. So we're talking about the NBA now a little bit. And you kind of answered this with Eric, but maybe you can elaborate a little more. There are promising figures showing that the NBA is gaining popularity with younger audiences and overseas audiences. What changes are the Mavs making or have made in recent history in content delivery to account for these new demographics?
Great question, because that's exactly the meetings I have coming up in 2 weeks. And so things like avatars, right? Being able to allow fans to interact with players, but rather than requiring FaceTime like this, right, on a Zoom or personalized, when that's possible, allowing players to have their own avatars. And then that raises the question, what kind of avatars, right? Do you want a genie-like thing, which is just like the bobblehead face, right? Do you want to do like the company out of Japan, AWWW, who effectively created these pseudo-humans that have Instagram accounts that have hundreds of thousands of followers and sponsors, and that's a lot more expensive. Do you want to do it, or do you want to do just AR where you do overlays? So there's a lot of questions there. And then how do we create content? Do you emulate somebody like FaZe Clan and what they're doing and be omni-channel and omni-product? How do we create virtual goods? So I've got a company, oh my God, 2020 CV, 2020 CV, 2020 computer vision, or what it stands for. And so we're starting off with virtual accessories like watches that anybody could put on their arms as part of their Instagram picture, as part of a TikTok video, and then resell them and put them in a marketplace. And how do we accommodate that and adapt that to the Mavs? Do we use the volumetric capture that we have in the Mavs arena? We have it's going up to 38 5K volumetric capture video cameras that we can use to create new types of videos. So all these things are multi-platform. It's not just a question of putting our guys on TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram like it used to be, and just letting them do their thing and having fun with it and not having the Mavs have a presence. Now to have a real strategy, particularly with someone like Luka, and taking all those things and making them global, or Kristaps Porzingis, making it global. Because to your point, Elisabeth, we are, after soccer, the most global sport, and we are a youth-oriented sport. We're basically tied with the NFL in terms of interest among Gen Z and younger. And so they're not looking for content and entertainment the way it's always been done. And so, we've had conversations about creating a TikTok version for sports. The beauty of TikTok isn't that you get to, watch me dance with my $1,000 pants, a whole lot of whatever going on. It's really how their algorithms work, and what TikTok does that's brilliant and has really worked is everything Elisabeth watches on TikTok, everything that Mark watches on TikTok, it actually looks to see what you're watching, and using computer vision and AI goes through all the millions of videos that they have and presents you on a trial basis comparable and similar videos. And it doesn't matter who you follow, that's irrelevant. It matters what you watch. And if you watch something over and over again, you're going to get a lot more of that stuff that you watch over and over. So my son has a different feed from my daughter, who has a different feed from me, who has a different feed from my oldest 17-year-old. Even if we followed all the same people, we would get unique individualized feeds. So how do we take that AI and develop it in that computer vision and develop it and then use it to pull from games that are going on at the same time? So rather than trying to get a kid to watch the whole Mavs versus Lakers game, let's just feed them what we think are the most exciting possessions in a format that are, a 24-second or 30-second possession. If you watch that, okay, we'll give you the next one. And if you fade away from that, we'll give you something else. And then you can check back, and we'll keep on trying it in your feed to see what you like. I know that's a long-winded answer to what's changing, but technology is just turning it completely upside down, and we have to be at the forefront of it. I talked earlier about having to learn all this stuff. That's exactly what I'm doing now. I have to learn about avatars. I have to learn about, shooting with volumetric cameras, even though one of my investments, 3D, that got bought by Intel was 7 years ago, was one of the first into volumetric capture. These are all things I have to keep on knowing, because to your point, it's changing. It's not even 180 degrees. It's on a whole different planet from how content was delivered for the NBA 3 years ago.
Yeah, definitely a good insight into how the Mavs are going to be changing with their content delivery. A lot of good pieces of advice, and also looking to the future. Tomorrow's election day.
Yep.
So of course we have to have an election related question here. How do we get Democrats and Republicans to talk to each other again? In that same vein too, we got a fun question here. Do you have any plans on running for the presidency in the future?
So 2 good questions. First, you're not going to get them to talk to each other having the system of voting the way it is right now. It just won't happen, because all the rewards go to people who win primaries. And since there's so many fewer people that vote in primaries, the politicians, customers, the people they have to pander to effectively, or to support, are the people with the most extreme views, because those are the people most likely to vote in the primaries and donate money. And so that takes them further, Democrats and Republicans and independents and libertarians, further and further apart. And so that's why I've become a big proponent of ranked choice voting, because with ranked choice voting, you can say, okay, it's not just about Donald Trump or Joe Biden, but it could be Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Mark Cuban, Elisabeth Lopez, et cetera, and then we rank those people. And this way, we're never in a position, hopefully, of saying, well, none of those candidates work for me, but if I had to choose, here's how I would rank them. And that also allows us to get to the point where a candidate needs 50% or more in order to be elected. And so that's the first thing. In terms of me running, I think I can have more of an impact by trying to make these changes. because, you know, as an independent, because I wouldn't run with either party at this point, but as an independent, all the conversation is going to be, well, I'm stealing votes. I'm a spoiler because I'm taking votes from this person or that person. But the other underlying question is, why do we need parties at all? I mean, it's not it's not 1776. It's not 1876, a year for historians that know was a real issue in terms of our democracy. It's not 1976, you know, it's 2020, 2021, and we don't need, you know, parties to help us communicate. You know, we don't need parties to have us align in how we think about issues. You know, we need to go back to that level of independence. And so ranked choice voting, you know, having people unaffiliate, I'd ask each and every one of you, you know, unaffiliate from a party. What do you need it for? I mean, maybe they used to have great parties, literally, you know, to go to and meet people and network, and maybe you like having that on your brand, you know, and your, you know, social media. But is it good for this country? I would tell you it's not. That if there were no parties, we'd be further ahead. If we had ranked choice or comparable voting mechanisms, you would see that partisanship disappear, because one of the consequences of the way we vote now is you get Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell as probably the two most powerful people in the country, if not two of the most powerful people in the world, because they're able to change. It used to be 10, 15 years ago, maybe, I don't have my dates exactly right, when if Elisabeth Lopez had a great idea for legislation, you took it to your senator, who took it to the Senate, and you took it to your congressperson, who took it to the House, and they each took it to the appropriate committee, and then it worked its way up to the committee, and then, you know, they try to come up with the House and the Senate would try to come together to see if they could put that legislation up for a vote. When was the last time any legislation even got put up for a vote? You can't even get them to, you know, unless it's already preordained what the result's going to be, you can't get either side to put anything up. You know, the committees no longer are based on who's the most, whether seniority or who would be the best as to get the best results. It's based off of what party is in charge. And within those committees, they won't even consider putting something up for a vote unless, you know, your Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell is fully behind it. And if you try to do something that they don't support, they'll take away the money train from you. I can't tell you how many senators and Congress people I've talked to who said, I don't want, you know, as I talked to a bunch in terms of the stimulus, I'm like, why the hell are you not screaming bloody murder that this is not passed because people need it? Well, if I do, Mark, I'm going to lose any access to capital that I have, and I won't get reelected. Doesn't matter if it's House or Senate, it works to both the same way in both. That's just wrong. And that underpinning is what's screwing us up badly. So one, unaffiliate, parties are useless. Two, look at, you know, vote for, support, enable, propose ranked choice voting or something comparable.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. I know we're a little over time here, so let me just ask you one quick kind of rapid fire question to sum it all up. How do you balance your business responsibilities with also being a good person?
Balancing it now with being a good person isn't so difficult because I try to be nice. You know, if you're nice and try to do the right thing, that's better for business. You know, when I started my business, first businesses, it was like, you know, I was never ruthless, but it wasn't beyond me to have a screaming match with one of my partners or employees. That adjective is just not worth it. Being nice is great business. People want to do business with people they like. And also having a social conscience is great business. People only want to do business with those people that, you know, they can relate to, that support the same things of importance that they support. And so that's really made it really straightforward and easy for me.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. Like I said, we're a little over time, but I know I gained so much insight from this conversation. And I'm sure many of our audience members feel the same way. So with that being said, I would like to extend a big thank you to Mark on behalf of the Harvard Association for Law and Business and all of our audience members today. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. And vote if you have vote.
Thank you again, Mark.
Thanks, guys.